السلام عليكم. لا تنسوا الإعجاب بالفيديو والاشتراك في القناة تشجيعا لنا لنستمر بنشر المزيد إن شاء الله.
Stilton is a creamy and crumbly British blue cheese whose roots date back to the early 1700s. It tastes mellower and less salty than many other varieties of blue cheese. Always produced in an 8-kilogram cylinder format, it has veins of blue mold radiating from the center outward. Tapioca pudding is a textural fusion of creaminess and chewy tapioca pearls. The recipe is at least a century old, and there are conflicting theories about when and where it was invented, Britain or the United States. With its distinctive chewiness, it brings something entirely different to the table. Stilton is a creamy and crumbly British blue cheese whose roots date back to the early 1700s. It tastes mellower and less salty than many other varieties of blue cheese. Always produced in an 8-kilogram cylinder format, it has veins of blue mold radiating from the center outward. The production of Stilton is strictly regulated. Only half a dozen dairies in the world, located in 3 specific English counties, are licensed to produce it, and only from locally produced, pasteurized milk. It takes 78 liters of milk to make each 8-kilogram cylinder of Stilton. They begin by pouring milk in a vat. Next, they add starter culture, laboratory-grown natural organisms. Then they mix a blue mold culture called Penicillium roqueforti with distilled water and add this to the milk as well. After about 3 hours, they stir in rennet, enzymes which coagulates the milk fat. After about 90 minutes, workers run a wire knife through the now gelatinous milk, separating the fat, called curds, from the liquid, called whey. Then overnight, they drain the whey out the bottom of the vat. The next morning, the firm curds go through a mill, which breaks them up into a crumbly consistency. Workers weigh out portions of 11 kilograms, each of which will become an 8-kilogram cylinder of cheese. After adding salt, the company won't disclose just how much, 2 workers gently hand-mix the portion. 2 different mixing styles, blending the ingredients more thoroughly than one. They funnel each portion into a cylindrical plastic cheese mold called a hoop. The curds still contain whey, so workers stack the hoops for 5 days. Typically, cheeses are pressed to drain the whey, not Stilton. Here, gravity does the job. The cheese drains under its own weight. Workers flip the hoop once daily to drain through both the top and bottom. After 5 days, they remove the hoop. The cheese, now drier, stands on its own, while with a knife, they perform a critical procedure called rubbing up. They rub the entire surface with a flat blade, sealing all the holes so that air can't penetrate and cause premature internal mold growth. Now the cheese goes onto a stillage, a type of trolley, and begins its journey through the climate-controlled bluing rooms, named for the color of the internal mold growth which occurs there. Workers flip the cheese daily to prevent its cylindrical shape from distorting under its own weight. Within a week to 10 days, grayish-white, sometimes orange, naturally occurring mold begins growing on the outside. And from that point on, when the cheese acquires a certain amount of mold, they move it to the next level room, then to the next one, and so on. At about the 5-week mark, they mount the cheese on the turntable of a piercing machine. With each press of a foot pedal, the turntable rotates slightly, and long stainless steel needles pierce the cheese. These tiny holes permit oxygen to enter and kickstart the Penicillium roqueforti blue mold culture, which the dairy put in the milk earlier on. Before long, blue mold gradually grows from the center of the cheese outward. To monitor the extent of blue mold growth, the dairy's cheese graters draw samples using a tool called a cheese iron. The iron reaches all the way to the core of the cylinder. When the sample shows that the bluing runs right through, the cheese is ready, more or less. The timing's actually a bit tricky. Stilton is a relatively young cheese, best eaten between 12 and 14 weeks. The dairy does its best to coordinate shipping so that the cheese is at its optimum quality when it reaches the customer. Therefore, it ships 8 or 9-week-old cheese to local stores and 7-week-old cheese to international customers, so that the blue Stilton will be an ideal 8 or 9 weeks of age when it arrives at its destination. Tapioca pudding is a textural fusion of creaminess and chewy tapioca pearls. The recipe is at least a century old, and there are conflicting theories about when and where it was invented, Britain or the United States. With its distinctive chewiness, it brings something entirely different to the table. Today, factories whip up tapioca pudding in big batches. Times have changed, but the appetite for this pearly pudding hasn't waned. The proof is truly in the pudding. The tapioca pearls, of course, define this dish. The opaque little balls are processed from a vegetable grown in South America called cassava root. The recipe also calls for more traditional baking ingredients, like whole milk, eggs, sugar, and vanilla. They pipe the whole milk into a giant mixing kettle. This kettle has steam-heated steel walls to gently cook the ingredients while blending them. As the milk froths, the cook measures the tapioca pearls. The pearls arrive at the factory already processed, formed by grinding the root vegetable into powder and tumbling it to shape it into properly sized pearls. As the pearls cook in the milk, they'll soften and swell to double the size, just like rice. But unlike rice, they'll take on an almost jelly-like, chewy consistency. He adds sugar to sweeten the mix. The cook then leaves the swirling and foaming mix to cook for over an hour. Meanwhile, at another station, they add tapioca starch to a different blender full of milk. This blender is unheated and has a higher speed for mixing that's fast and furious. He adds eggs. And he flavors the mix with salt. The tapioca starch acts as a thickening agent for this separate mix, as the blender whips it to a frothy state. They transfer the starch blend to the main mixing kettle. The cook adds a natural food coloring to make the pudding beige, along with some vanilla flavoring. The tapioca pearls are just the right consistency. This pudding is now fully cooked and ready to move on to the filling line. They pump it while it's still steaming hot into single-serve plastic cups. Packaging the pudding while it's still hot is an act of food preservation, which, not surprisingly, is called hot fill. The hot fill technique locks in nutrients and ensures freshness, giving the product a shelf life of about 70 days. Suctioning arms swiftly transfer foil lids to cover the cups, giving the pudding no time to cool down. With the lids in place, the filler moves the cups forward to meet up with heat sealer heads. They fuse the foil lids to the plastic cup rims. It's taken just seconds to fill these cups with hot tapioca pudding and seal them, effectively preserving them. The pudding-filled cups now funnel into a lane to position them single file. Then they travel between rubber belts that squeeze them. If they can take the pressure, it confirms that the cups are tightly sealed. A printer sprays the expiry date and other pertinent information onto the cup. After weighing to confirm there's enough pudding inside, an X-ray machine scans the contents to confirm that there are no contaminants. Then they're on their way to the chilling line. Inside the tubs, the tapioca pudding is still hot and fluid. The cups ride a system of spiraling refrigerated conveyors, bringing the pudding's temperature down to about 4 degrees Celsius and thickening it substantially. The pudding-filled containers now pass through gates that separate them into 2 lanes and then arrange them in groups of 3. Machinery places one group of 3 onto another, and then all that's left is the packaging. Mechanical arms place the paperboard sleeve on the top 3 cups. Traveling through a narrow lane, guides fold the paperboard down around the bottom 3 cups as a sprayer applies hot glue to the flaps. A worker pulls off 1 pack of 6 and sends it over to a panel of testers for an inspection and taste. They examine the pudding for color and consistency. They also taste a little from each production batch to confirm that it's sweet enough, that the tapioca beads are the desired texture, and that it meets all other quality requirements. If they like what they taste, the entire batch is declared ready for retail. 3 hours in the making, this tapioca pudding is now ready to add a little sweetness to someone's day.